Persecuted, not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed. I am blessed beyond the curse, for his promise will endure, that his joy is gonna be my strength. Whoa. Though the sorrows may last for the night, joy comes in the morning. I'm trading my sorrow, I'm trading my shame, I'm laying them down for the joy of the Lord. I'm trading my sickness, I'm trading my pain, I'm laying them down for the joy of the Lord. And we say yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen. And we say yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen. Oh, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen. And we say yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen. Oh, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen. And we say yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen. And we say yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen. Yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen. Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen. Yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen.
Good morning, and welcome to the 20th Annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Virtual Breakfast Celebration. My name is David Gomes, and I'm the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth's Chief Diversity Officer. This morning, I have the privilege and honor of serving as your co-host, along with Jasmine Jenkins and Narcisse Kunda, two of our preeminent student leaders on campus. Jasmine, a member of the class of 2022, is a crime and justice studies major and political science minor. She's the current president of the Student Government Association and is also a member of the Rhythms of Africa dance team. Narcisse Kunda, also a member of the class of 2022, is double majoring in management, organizational leadership, and marketing. He's the student trustee for UMass Dartmouth, the senior class vice president, and an active member of the National Society of Black Engineers. I am definitely an esteemed company this morning and honored to be in the presence of these two outstanding student leaders.
Thank you, David. Good morning. My name is Jasmine Jenkins. To open our formal program, I would like to introduce our very own Dees Ward Gospel Choir. Dees Ward, which was established 16 years ago on the UMass Dartmouth campus, ministers through gospel music to penetrate the hearts, minds, and souls of its audience. Please welcome UMass Dartmouth Dees Ward Gospel Choir, accompanied by the talented Unique Sound Band as they open our program with our first musical selection, Lift Every Voice and Sing. a song designated by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, commonly referred to as the NAACP, as the Black National Anthem. Traditionally, it is customary to stand for the singing of the Black National Anthem if you're able to do so.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Diesel Gospel Choir, for that beautiful performance. My name is Narcis Kunda. On behalf of Chancellor Mark A, the faculty and staff and students at UMass Dartmouth, I'd like to welcome you to the 20th annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Virtual Breakfast Celebration. This year's theme for our breakfast celebration is Dr. King for the 21st Century. Dr. King believed in the possibility of America, but never hesitated to challenge America's stance on race, culture, poverty, and justice, topics which are still as relevant today as they were when Dr. King first brought them to the forefront of America's consciousness. As the struggles continues today for equity and equality, regardless of one's gender, race, ethnicity, religious or political belief, education, socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, culture, or disability, we need to extend Dr. King's legacy of activism into the 21st century so that freedom and justice is a reality for all and not merely a dream. At this time, I invite you to watch a short video commemorating Dr. King's legacy of activism.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop.
I am a segregationist.
You love your little niggas, I love who I please.
I feel that nonviolence is really the only way, because violence is just so self-defeating. A riot ends up creating many more problems for the Negro community than it solves. You can, through violence, burn down a building, but you can't establish justice. You can murder a murderer, but you can't murder murder through violence. You can murder a hater, but you can't murder hate. And what we are trying to get rid of is hate.
Can we honestly say that it doesn't affect our security and the fight for peace when Negroes are denied their full constitutional rights?
We must come to see that the end we seek is a society at peace with itself. And that will be a day not of the white man, not of the black man. That will be the day of man as man. Segregation in public transportation will pass away. The Negro citizens will return to the buses on a non-segregated basis. Things that are being done by youth will make Birmingham a better city for everybody. I have a dream. My poor little children one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. Bring the attention of the nation to this whole issue in Selma, Alabama.
What he's asking for is right.
How long? Not long. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. And we as a people will get to the promised land. The time has come for the president to sign an executive order outlawing segregation. Register to vote. We will speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
And now, please join me in welcoming the Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, Dr. Mark A. Fuller. Chancellor of UMass Dartmouth, Dr. Mark A. Fuller is a proud first-generation college student and a passionate advocate for public education. Dr. Fuller previously served as Vice Chancellor for Advancement at UMass Amherst, where he engaged more than 270,000 alumni and donors and cultivated some of the largest gifts in UMass history. Before his tenure as Vice Chancellor, Dr. Fuller served as the Dean and Thomas O'Brien Endowed Chair at the Eisenberg School of Management in Amherst, where he spent 9 transformative years building Eisenberg's national reputation. Dr. Fuller received his MS in Management and PhD in Management Information Systems from the University of Arizona's Eller College of Management. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Dr. Mark A. Fuller.
Thank you, David, for that introduction. I was watching the chat, and one of the comments was the most powerful orator of all time never gets old. And I couldn't agree more. Powerful, powerful words. Thank you too, David, for your leadership and for helping put this fantastic event together, and for everything you do to make UMass Dartmouth a more inclusive, supportive, and vibrant community. Welcome, everyone. I'm honored to be with you today for a celebration and conversation, the perfect way to begin a new semester. We celebrate and honor Dr. Martin Luther King every year at this time as our campus is coming alive after winter break. Our students, faculty, and staff all return with a sense of purpose and possibility. What a fitting backdrop to remember and honor the legacy of Dr. King, a pastor, a leader, and a visionary with tremendous purpose and passion. His work growing a movement made space for our country to imagine a future filled with new possibilities and equal opportunities for everyone. And speaking of those who inspire us, we are privileged and excited to have with us today Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, a distinguished scholar, author, and thought leader. In a speech Dr. Dyson gave about MLK at Elmhurst University, he talked about the individuals who have contributed to the fabric of our nation and pointed out that MLK, despite his undeniable, immeasurable contributions to our country, was at the end of the day, one person, a private citizen. He never ran for office, but used his voice to, quoting Dr. Dyson, make an argument for the betterment of American life and the expansion of American democracy. In the 54 years since Dr. King's murder, important progress has been made, yet his call to action remains urgent and unfulfilled in so many ways. But if one person can have the impact Dr. King had, hope and possibility lives inside all of us. Here at UMass Dartmouth, that possibility is alive in our research, our creative and innovative faculty, and our dedicated staff. And nowhere is it more visible and palpable than in our passionate student body. Our students embody the commitment to service and the desire to fuel the change that Dr. King continues to inspire today. They donate more than 260,000 hours of service each year to our community. They fight for social justice and against systemic racism. They advocate for one another and give voice to perspectives that have been overlooked and silenced. They also champion our democracy in ways I believe would make Dr. King proud. In the last presidential election, our campus saw a double-digit increase, not only in those registered to vote, but in students that went to the polls and cast their ballots. This was accomplished in large part because of the hard work of student canvassers working hand in hand with the Ledoux Center for Civic Engagement on campus. I expect our campus to have an even stronger showing in this year's elections. In the meantime, our students and the rest of campus community will continue their powerful civic involvement. They will engage in campaigns, get out to vote, volunteer at the polls, and push for meaningful policy changes. That's what activism in action looks like here on the South Coast. There's so much to do. The betterment of American life and expansion of American democracy depends on all of us. Let's recommit to putting our democratic values into action in ways big and small, local and global, in the fierce spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King. Thank you all again for being here this morning. Thank you, Dr. Dyson, for joining us. And thank you especially to our incredible student community for paying daily tribute to MLK's legacy through your service and activism.
Thank you, Chancellor Fuller, for delivering such inspirational remarks. We are very excited to have joining us today a very special musical guest, Ms. Candida Rose. Candida, an American-born Cape Verdean, is a vocalist, songwriter, entertainer, musical and cultural educator, as well as a mother and grandmother. An alumna of UMass Dartmouth, Candida graduated summa cum laude with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in music, specializing in African-American/world music performance, and a minor in African-American studies. She went on to earn her Master's of Science degree in Transnational Cultural and Community Studies from UMass Boston. In addition to her work with various jazz, R&B, and Cape Verdean musical groups through her company, Golden Rose Music, Candida spends her days traveling the South Coast region of Massachusetts and Rhode Island as a life enrichment entertainer. Please join me in welcoming Candida Rose as she performs Someday We'll All Be Free, a song written and composed by Donny Hathaway and Edward Howard.
Thank you so much, UMass Dartmouth, for allowing me to be here with you on this very, very special occasion, the 20th anniversary of your MLK breakfast and celebration. And I am just so honored to be here with you today. So what I'd like to do is, my first song is an amazing song by the late, great Mr. Donny Hathaway called Someday We'll All Be Free. Feel free to sway with me. Just don't let the spin bring you down. Things are moving fast. Hold on tight and you will last. Keep your self-respect, your human pride. Get yourself in gear, keep your stride. Never mind your fears. Brighter days will soon be here. Take it from me, someday we'll all be free. All right, what I would like you to do, if you can, is just feel the music with me. Keep on walking tall, hold your head up high, and lay your dreams right up to the sky. Sing your greatest song, and you'll keep going on. Take it from me, someday we'll all be free. Yeah, hey, just wait and see, someday we'll all be free. Yeah, oh, take it from me, someday we'll all be free. Yes, oh, it won't be long. Oh, we'll all be free. Yeah, don't take it from me, someday we'll all be free.
All right. Thank you, Miss Rose, for that beautiful rendition of Someday We'll All Be Free. At this time, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. Dr. Dyson is the Centennial Chair at Vanderbilt University and serves as University Distinguished Professor of African American and Diaspora Studies in the College of Arts and Sciences and University Distinguished Professor of Ethics and Society in the Divinity School. He's also a New York Times contributing opinion writer and a contributing editor of the New Republic and ESPN's The Undefeated website. Dr. Dyson, who came from humble roots in Detroit, has authored 21 books and become a prominent leader and national media fixture. He has won an African American Book Award and 2 NAACP Image Awards. Ebony cited him as one of 100 most influential African Americans and one of the 100 most powerful Blacks in the nation. Dr. Dyson's pioneering scholarship has had a profound effect on American ideas. His 1994 book, Making Malcolm, The Myth and Meaning of Malcolm X, was named one of the most important African-American books of the 20th century and was also named the notable book of the year by the New York Times. According to Publishers Weekly, Dyson's 2001 book, Fuller, If You Hear Me, Searching for Tupac Shakur, helped make the book on hip-hop commercially viable. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Eric Dyson.
Thank you very kindly, my friend, for that gracious introduction. Looks like a sunny day behind you there. What an honor it is to be with you today, to speak about Dr. King and then engage in conversation about his legacy for the 21st century. It is always important for us to remember that when speaking about, excuse me, an extraordinary figure like Dr. King, he was a rather complicated man. And what we have done is reduced his complexity and nuance, flattened it out, and made it less powerful, less radical, less revolutionary than might otherwise be the case. And yet he remains, in many instances, a powerful galvanizing figure for those of us who are committed to social justice and who are committed to extraordinary acts and gestures of humanity and civil rights, but also transformative engagement with the world in which we live. So I'm honored to be here today to talk about Dr. King in that way. When we think about Martin Luther King Jr., of course, we freeze him in 1963, 34 words he uttered when he was 34 years old. I have a dream one day my 4 little children will live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That is an ideal, a noble aspiration that Dr. King harbored in his heart and in his collective imagination about what America might be should it embrace the full range of American democracy, of the truth and justice and freedom and equality that this nation at its best represented. But he was often willing to leverage the moral authority of his own intellectual and spiritual tradition to put pressure against that tradition of American democracy, of an American dream, because he said his dream was deeply rooted in the American dream, and yet his dream put pressure on the American dream to do right. As Dr. King said the night before he was murdered, all we ask, America, is be true to what you said on paper. And so he wanted to close the gap between the ideals and the realities of American democracy. And he was willing to commit himself to that. And so we have frozen Dr. King in a dreamscape. We have frozen Dr. King in 34 words uttered when he was 34 years old. We have frozen Dr. King in a kind of we are the world. Now, a lot of y'all who are too young to remember that, Michael Jackson, Lionel Richie, and others who raised millions upon millions of dollars for charity with that song. But it was a beautiful song, but a song that nurtured the hope of transformation in a kind of gentle and beautiful and passionate way, as it should have done. But Martin Luther King Jr. Was far more radical than that, more revolutionary than that, because he was dealing with deeper problems, more deeply entrenched problems: white supremacy, social injustice, economic inequality. What do we do about the nature of American government? How do we talk about suppressing the Black vote? How do we overcome the resistance to Black people being seen as human? And the interesting, maybe intriguing, and certainly traumatizing and tragic reflection we might make in regard to Dr. King's ideas is that they are as ever relevant now as they ever have been. We are living in a nation where we're dealing with a global pandemic on the one hand, and a deeply and profoundly entrenched racial crisis on the other. We could say we're caught between two pandemics, global pandemic, COVID-19 and COVID 2019. COVID on the one hand and COVID-19 on the other. We are living in a time when America is deeply troubled around its racial issues. And because it has frozen Dr. King in a narrow vision, Dr. King is made to be a resource for those who would challenge present activists in their insistence that we grapple with issues of race, because they have wrongly frozen Dr. King in a dreamscape. They contradict, they think, Dr. King, contradicts what we see going on in contemporary movement. And yet that is not the case. That is only the case because we have frozen King at one point of his evolution, one point of his articulation, one point of his prophetic expression against those who are more challenging now. And we tend to forget that Martin Luther King Jr. was seen as a challenging figure when he lived. The second in command at the FBI said he was the most dangerous Negro leader in America. Right? Think about that. That he was a menace, that he was a threat. The FBI knew that there were death threats against Dr. King, but refused to warn him. So for those who would dare say that, under certain regimes of power in this nation, that the FBI and other institutions of American society are to be viewed skeptically, well, you've got a point, but you're like 60 years too late. You're like 50 years too late. You're like 55 years too late. When Martin Luther King Jr. was being attacked and assaulted, not only by white supremacists who sought to arrest his development and the development of the civil rights movement, but by those who would murder him in any way possible. The FBI refused, in many cases, to even warn him about credible and legitimate threats because they were complicit in the subversion of American democratic process through the civil rights movement. And so what I'm simply saying here is the only way you can juxtapose Martin Luther King Jr. against the contemporary movement for social justice in broad stroke is because you have misinterpreted what King was about. King was about deeply rooted passions for truth, justice, and freedom that certainly reverberate with our own contemporary desire to confront social injustice in our own day. Those who think that Martin Luther King Jr. would be against CRT, critical race theory, probably have not read Dr. King when he said that racism is deeply entrenched in America and that he was sad to contend that many of his white brothers and sisters, he said most at that time, were unconscious racists, right? And so you can only have a kind of narrow view of Martin Luther King Jr. if you don't look at the broad range of his ideas, the incredible scope of his thinking. But it was always geared toward lovingly, redemptively transforming America to make it what it ought to be. But in order to do that, to embrace Martin Luther King Jr., to see his relationship to critical race theory, to the 1619 Project, people think, oh my God, King would never say those kinds of things. He literally spoke about the 1619 date and its importance in our lives. His college roommate, his college schoolmate was Lerone Bennett, who talked about Black people coming before the Mayflower and spoke about 1619 as one of the real dates in American history. So for these deeply, profoundly conservative right-wing brothers and sisters who may have issue with those who speak today about 1619 or critical race theory, and critical race theory ain't being taught, for instance, in schools, not in junior high, not in high school, not in elementary school. Critical race theory is a particular way of viewing race that was put forth by Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, Marie Matsuda, Charles Lawrence, and a bunch of law professors up there in Massachusetts, in Boston to begin with, and in Cambridge, and then it spread out. And all they were saying is, when it comes to race, don't just talk about individual forms of bias, think about systems, not individuals, institutions, not sentiments and passions, but systems and structures. That's what they were saying. And they were talking about how we have to collectively grapple with issues of racial inequity in our justice system. And do we deny it now as a Black woman is going to be put forth as the candidate to be confirmed by the US Senate as the next Supreme Court justice, when we have a 6-3 balance between, or imbalance between, far right-wing beliefs and anything seeming moderate or liberal? God knows, even progressive in this country. When we look at the fact that many of those who are on that consequential court harbor ideas that may be or seem to be hostile to a far more progressive, liberal, open-minded, open-hearted, engaged perspective. And I don't want to demonize people on the right or valorize people on the left. I want to talk about how we can remake America by appealing to Martin Luther King Jr., but not in Martin Luther King Jr., who's been frozen in 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. said, America, be true to what you said on paper. America, close the gap between the ideals you articulate and the nefarious practices that undermine and subvert the extraordinary ways in which we are capable of realizing those ambitions of democracy. And so when we look at George Floyd, for instance, and we look at Breonna Taylor, for instance, or Ahmaud Arbery, we are reminded that the noble aspirations of Martin Luther King Jr., living in a culture where we are not judged by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character, have been denied, not by Black people who insist upon racial justice, as many people would today say that we are undermining Dr. King. It is undermined by persistent and lethal racism, by white supremacist thought that harms not only people of color, indigenous people, Asian people, Black people, but also white brothers and sisters themselves, because it denies us legitimate access to ideas that could help remake America. Instead of on January 6th, storming the Capitol and in a bitter resentment of your perceived lack of justice and democracy for yourself, right? I would deeply and profoundly disagree with that. I agree with people's right to protest, but that's not a protest. That's an insurrection. That's an attempt to subvert democracy. That's an attempt to get rid of the basic and fundamental principles of justice in America. That's an attempt to delegitimate a voting process that opens to everyone. This is why there are 48 states, there are 400 and some bills attempting to suppress the vote. If we are committed to democracy as Dr. King was, if we're committed to truth and freedom and equality as he was, why are we trying to get fewer people to vote? Why not more people to vote? And so as I end, if we're talking about a Dr. King who was useful for the 21st century, it is a Dr. King rooted in history, a Dr. King rooted in truth, a Dr. King rooted in radical democracy, a Dr. King rooted in what he called a revolution of American ideas, right? A revolution of American passion, a revolution, what he said, of values. And the values we must have is valuing the poor, valuing the vulnerable, valuing those whose backs are against the wall, women whose lives are being manipulated by political forces that refuse to acknowledge their full humanity and their right to exercise legitimate agency in the context of American lives. Those people of color, Black and brown and people who are indigenous and Asian brothers and sisters, who in varying ways continue to be the victims of white supremacist logics. Poor white people struggling against the odds. As Dr. King was in jail one day, and his white jailers came to him saying, you know, this struggle for freedom that you are waging is wrong, that your notion of desegregation is wrong, your notion of integration is wrong. He said, no, it's not. They said, yes, it is. And he finally asked, how much money do you make? And when they told him the pittance that they made, Dr. King said, you need to be out here marching with us. And so, my brothers and sisters, if we are to come together, if we are to have a galvanizing force, if Martin Luther King Jr. is to summon us to our best destiny, we must embrace the full range of contemporary struggle against injustice. No sense of juxtaposing Dr. King then against Black Lives Matter now, because Dr. King was seen as a threat as a menace, as a danger. I know it's hard for you to believe that, but read your history. Read how Martin Luther King Jr. was viewed. And if he was so widely loved, why was he murdered? And why did so many people celebrate his death? This is a man who can bring us all together, regardless of our politics or our ideologies or our colors or our castes, if we are permitted to embrace a Dr. King who challenged the status quo, who risked his life in defense of vulnerable populations, and who was willing to transform, as he said, the jangling discords of America into a great symphony of brotherhood and sisterhood for our own day. Thank you so very kindly.
Good morning, Dr. Dyson.
Good morning, sir.
My name's David Gomes. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer here at UMass Dartmouth. We are honored and privileged to have you here with us this morning. My co-host, Jasmine Jenkins, who is a graduating senior and the president of our Student Government Association. If you would indulge us, we'd like to engage in a moderated question and answer session.
Sure.
Great, we greatly appreciate that. So Jasmine will pose the first question.
Right.
Thank you. So the national theme for the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday for 2022 is, quote, starts with me, shifting priorities to create the beloved community, end quote. What does this mean to you, and what advice do you have for our local community as we apply this theme to our day-to-day lives?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so very much for that intelligent question. You know, it does begin with me. You know, even though I've been speaking about systemic issues and structural inequalities and the like, it is extremely important to understand that at the end of the day, we must take responsibility for transforming America into the beloved community. And the beloved community means a place where people can feel safe, where they can feel protected, where they are able to exercise their right to vote without undue harassment, that they're able to live their lives fully without economic insecurity, without food deserts, without militarism, without violence, without white supremacy, without racial inequity challenging them. And it means that we should live in a society where our politicians are not about figuring out ways to suppress the vote. And that's geared toward African-American people in particular, though elderly voters as well, some Jewish brothers and sisters in, say, Florida. You know, there are many populations who are disadvantaged by such procedures, practices, and processes. But at the same time, you know, we got to realize that we got to fight back against that kind of, you know, I think, unjust appropriation of Dr. King's ideas and of American ideas of democracy and of good governance. So the beloved community is about imagining a place where together, through love, through redemptive practice, through justice that is committed to making the ideas of love practical pillars in our public places, that's what it means. And we all have to have a responsibility wherever we are, you know, whatever we do, school children, students, teachers, lawyers, doctors, you know, school administrators, fire women and men, police women and men, across the board. We all have a responsibility to make a contribution to this ideal community that can express our best values as American citizens.
Thank you, Dr. Dyson. I have the next question. Dr. Dyson, our country has witnessed the murderers of men and women of color, including Breonna Taylor, not punished for their crimes. With the recent guilty verdicts and sentencings of the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, do you feel that our legal system is now working for people of color? And what more can be done?
Yeah, the legal system is not working as ideally as it should for African-American people. when we think about the fact that we look at, you mentioned Ahmaud Arbery or George Floyd, thank God that finally, some justice was done. But Malcolm X says, you don't put a knife in my back 9 inches, pull it out 6 inches and call that progress. Knife is still in the back. So yes, there's been undeniable progress. It used to be that with Emmett Till, they went into court, deliberated for less than an hour. They said it wouldn't have taken that long had they not stopped for a Coke break, and then delivered the verdict that we knew was coming, a kangaroo court, that there was no possibility of justice, no possibility that a white person charged with killing a black person would ever be held to account. So yes, with Ahmaud Arbery's killers, his murderers who tried to dress up their, murder of him with their suspicion of making a citizen's arrest. Why are you pursuing a man? Why can't a man run through his own neighborhood without evoking some sense of trauma or menace or threat or danger? And what gives you the right to hunt him down like an animal, like a dog, and murder him as he tried to defend himself? So, with Breonna Taylor, with George Floyd, George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery's killers are serving time, but that's not real justice. Real justice is to be able to live in the first place without being murdered, without being killed. But living in a society where in the criminal justice system, disproportionate numbers of Black people are not arrested for petty crimes. Nonviolent drug offenses continue to be the bane of the existence of poor and struggling African-American, Latino, and poor people in general. So we know that the criminal justice system is not yet right. The disparities in crack cocaine versus powder cocaine, we've addressed historically, but they still prevail. The gap has been, lessened in some instances, but still traumatic, still dangerous, and still problematic in other instances. When we think about the sentencing of African-American people, we see a Black man was put to death, was it yesterday? A man who was not fully mentally competent, because the death penalty disproportionately targets Black people in this nation. So while we've made undeniable progress, there is still a long way to go. And there's still many ways in which, on an everyday level, Black people don't receive the kind of justice that should be theirs. When you look at the cash bail system, when you look at how Black people are kept in jail, Sandra Bland may have lived had she been able to bail out, but she couldn't afford the $500 and therefore was in jail and found hung in her jail cell. So there are so many ways in which the justice system continues to be unequal, full of inequities, riddled with problems that need to be addressed. So I think that when we look at that all together, it is deeply and profoundly problematic, and justice yet awaits. And we must continue to work toward that day when the system is far more equitable and just for people of color, and especially Black people in this nation.
Thank you, Dr. Dyson. Our next question is, many universities struggle with whether to raise the Black Lives Matter flag, despite students' continual requests.
Right.
What advice do you have for students to assist them in making their case? And what advice do you have for senior leadership who have the responsibility for making the final decision?
Yeah, what's interesting, we're not talking about a Confederate flag that was raised so powerfully among so many people for so many years in this nation until it became a bad thing. We're not speaking about an attempt to undermine American democracy, like the people on January 6th who rode through the congressional halls, rode, physically walked, dragging that flag, who claimed to be lovers of America, who were not punished, all right? For the most part. Some are now belatedly, but we know if that was Black people, Latino people, women gathered together to protect their abortion rights or their right to choose their own, existence and stuff, what the consequence would be. And so why are we paralleling Black Lives Matter, a movement that was necessitated and brought into existence by the galling, appalling murder, often by police, but not exclusively, of Black people in this nation? How is a Black Lives Matter flag symbol now become problematic? Because reactionary forces have contended that this is un-American, this is not true to American principles, practices, and democracy, that somehow to say that Black Lives Matter is controversial. Well, white lives matter too. Of course they do. That's why we have to say Black Lives Matter. You don't have to say white lives matter when white lives matter. That's redundant. You don't have to say that. Schools show that white lives matter. Government institutions show that Black lives matter. Lending institutions show that Black lives matter. The gulf between home ownership in Black and white communities and Latino communities proves that white lives matter. White lives matter across the board. Most of the hosts of Saturday Night Live show that white lives matter, right? When we look at the newsrooms of America, white lives matter. When we look at the US Senate, white lives matter. When we look at the history of American presidency, white lives matter. When we look at the Supreme Court, where the overwhelming majority have been white men, white lives matter. When we look at the Forbes 500, who runs them? White lives matter. You ain't got to say what's already obvious. We got to say Black lives matter because it ain't obvious. And so to try, despite whatever complications people might have, they'll come back, well, they're Marxists and they're so on, and they're undermining American beliefs and values. The notion of Black lives mattering should be an uncontroversial idea that any reasonable school administrator can acknowledge. And if it's divisive, it's polarizing because the forces of white supremacy and reactionary response to the demand for justice have claimed such a powerful stance that they would make a parallel between some obnoxious viewpoints that are being harbored on their interests and side versus a reasonable articulation and insistence of a fundamental principle that should be uncontroversial, that the lives of Black people are of significance and importance, that they matter in this culture.
Thank you, Dr. Dyson. Our next question. Dr. King once said, quote, "We must live together as brothers, perish together as fools," unquote. The two major political parties continue to make a concerted effort not to work together. Do you have any suggestions that will change the hearts and minds of lawmakers so that they'll work together towards the benefit of everyone?
Let me tell you who worked together. When George Floyd was killed, a white policeman put his knee on the neck of George Floyd. Now that killed him, but he wasn't alone. A Black policeman had his knee on the man's back. Another white policeman had his knees on his legs. And an Asian police person was the lookout and denied others who were standing around the opportunity to interrupt what was clearly an execution and lynching. Working together ain't the issue. They work together toward what end? To harm and ultimately kill this Black man. Unity is the bridge. The goal is justice. Working together is the means toward a broader end. The Ku Klux Klan works together, right? With white supremacists and the White Citizens Council, with the Supreme Court, and the politicians in America in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, they worked together, wasn't no problem, to create misery, havoc. So I would warn us against the overwhelming belief that the problem is not working together. If you come together to work toward an unjust end, working together ain't a ethical practice. Now, having said that, both sides ain't equally. Am I supposed to tell the truth? Give me the sign. If I'm supposed to lie, let me know. Because otherwise I got to go, where you living? Where you living? Where you living, America? Are you kidding? It ain't both sides. There's one side that wants to stop people from voting. I'm sorry. I don't see no Democrats trying to unleash antiquated, anti-democratic, small d, unjust voting rights restrictions that would reinforce the vulnerability of black citizens. I'm sorry. It ain't both sides. Both sides didn't justify and legitimate what happened on January 6th. Before we worked together, we got to work apart to say we distance ourselves from that tragedy. Now, those who want justice come together. And in that sense, we can have Democrat and Republican and independent. We can have right wing and Marxists on the left working together if we agree that all people should have the maximum capacity to exercise agency and leverage their particular positions as citizens toward a just end in American society. So work together is secondary. Working toward just goals is primary. And when we make that distinction, then we see that Martin Luther King Jr. was considered divisive and extremist. Read his 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail. He said, man, they call me an extremist, but Jesus was an extremist. Mahatma Gandhi was an extremist. He said, I'm not, working toward the same ends as the White Citizens Council and white ministers. And the rabbi told him, slow down. You're going too fast. He said, no, you missing the point. I can't wait. Dr. King wasn't working with them. Wasn't working together with the people who thought he was working too hard for justice. So sometimes you got to draw your line in the sand. Now, we shouldn't think that we are, perfect and that we have the best ideas alone. We should be willing to be self-critical. But in an era like ours, where one group of people have been determinately set against practices and politics that are far more enabling and productive, then we're living in bad times. That's why Adam Kinzinger won't run again, right? Or people who are, reasonable Republicans who believe what they believe. They're not Democrats, they're Republicans. They want to work toward a world that is far more progressive, but they've seen a vicious ideology unleashed in the name of one party that is subversive of democracy. So it ain't that, our politicians won't work together. Can they stand up for truth? Can they stand up for democracy? Now, I know those are some highly charged words that people have legitimate disagreements over, but legitimate disagreements over the possibility of democracy is one thing. Enabling your narrow viewpoint to become hegemonic and dominant, where you exclude others as part of your vision, that ain't working. And so I don't believe in that both sides at that point, my friend.
Thank you. Our next question, with the repeated false claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election, the passage of voter suppression laws and gerrymandering efforts taking place in many states, what steps can citizens take to ensure equality in voting for all?
Right. I'm going to do something that seems paradoxical. You got to vote. Well, dang, they try to suppress the vote. I know. But, they were trying to suppress the vote for real back in 1960, 61, 62. They kept marching. They kept organizing. They finally got a bill passed. And even with the bill passed, they had to have politics that would match the bill. And then they had to defend it. And the Supreme Court had to defend it. And they had to say, we've got to do pre-clearance, that these states, especially in the South, that historically have tried to use tricks to try to keep people from voting. Nope, you got to clear it with us. So they couldn't do it. But in the Supreme Court, was it 2013? I don't know, Holder versus, You know, Shelby County, when the Supreme Court struck down these pre-clearances and stuff, that was a tragic day. And we see the consequence of it now and all these bills that are out here. So we can't give up. We got to still fight. But young people, you got to vote. You got to figure out ways to fool these foolers. You know, there's a lot of people out here trying to hate on y'all, but y'all be going, you ain't going to hate on me. Cardi B, the game. Nicki Minaj, the game. You know what I'm saying? Don't DaBaby the game. All right. Jay-Z, the game. Nas, the game. Taylor Swift, the game. Haters gonna hate, even though she's being sued now, because some dude said she took my joint. That's me. But anyway, the point is, just because somebody against you don't mean you got to give up. Figure out ways to get around them. So one of the things we got to do is continue to vote where we can, where we know we can vote. I'm going to chill out today. It's raining out here. Dog, what's up with you? Act like it's a Beyonce concert. I'm going, I don't care. I'm going to see B. I'm going to see B. Okay, maybe I'm old. I don't know who's the, you know, going to see Summer Walker, SZA, Jizza, whoever. So the point is, you know, Little Uzi Vert, Lil Baby, Da Baby, Baby Mama, Baby, whoever baby. Point is, act like it's one of them. Oh, I got to go see them, right? And so figure out ways around what they're trying to do so we can exercise our right to vote. Churches got to do their part. Synagogues, temples, voluntary organizations, fraternities and sororities. Don't just go, who, hey, hey. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just picking one. But whatever your gang affiliation is. I mean, whatever your sorority and fraternity is. Oops, that was a slip. I'm just joking. Don't at me. This is A by A. Don't be disrespecting us. This is Delta. I ain't mad at you, but the Delta variant is hurting us. Joke. It's a joke. Where's the AKA variant? Oops, I'm sorry. Joking. It's a joke. It's a joke. So the point is, figure out ways to creatively challenge the lethal limits imposed in the name of voter fraud and going against voter fraud. The only fraud in voting in most of these people putting forth these daggone bills. So that's one thing. Then you got to figure out who you putting in office. I don't make no difference. See, it ain't just about president. It ain't just about vice president. It's about local elections, because local people making up these daggum rules. These are state legislators. That's why you got to vote for these people. Put them out of office if they doing that kind of, those kind of shenanigans and that kind of malarkey, as the President Biden would say. And then we got to be determined, like Dr. King, like Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm sick and tired, she said, of being sick and tired, and you ain't gonna turn us around. So join local organizations that are already doing work. You ain't got to reinvent the wheel. Black Lives Matter, local grassroots organizations. There are some, Black Lives Matter is doing a lot more than you think they are. And part of their stuff is to talk about voter suppression and stuff. If you want to join other organizations that are doing things on the ground, Reverend William Barber, and the Poor People's Campaign, Reverend Freddie Haynes, and payday loans and how they're viciously assaulting, Black people and brown people. Now, that ain't about voting, but that is about economic security, that if you had more of it, you wouldn't be so obsessed with that and worried about taking a day off or getting out for work early to vote. And why don't we have, finally, a national holiday for voting? Why you got to make people choose between their kids, I know it's their kids, and their kids, and going to work and getting up early and trying to vote? Why don't you just make it a holiday where everybody can go vote? So those are some of the things, and we got to continue to not allow the people who are arrayed against democracy to have the loudest voice in the room.
Thank you, Dr. Dyson. Next question. Historically disenfranchised citizens have fought tirelessly for equal voting rights, affirmative action, women's reproductive rights, to name a few. These rights are at risk of being restricted or eliminated by the current Supreme Court. What steps can we take as citizens to counteract the potential erosion or reversal of these fundamental rights by the Supreme Court?
Yeah, it's ugly. It ain't simple either, because they got a lot of power. You know, rich women are going to be fine if abortion is outlawed. They go to their, you know, they got money. They go to another state. They go to a provider who will take care of them behind the scenes in their own practices that are not back alley abortions. This affects poor people. This is a war against poor people of color. Make no mistake about it. And so what we've got to do is find ways where we continue to raise our voices. And the last question ain't unrelated to this one. That's why we got to vote, because who's putting somebody on the Supreme Court? One person put on some very right-wing people who seem to be disposed against ideas that would help the masses of citizens. Another one says, I'm gonna put on a Black woman. That's all because you voted for that person or that person, one versus the other. Even if you didn't vote for them, right? They're gonna have a major impact on your life. The Supreme Court ain't appointed by Martians. They're appointed, or at least nominated, by presidents and then confirmed by senates. Now we got Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema in there. If you're a Democrat like us, you know, a liberal or a progressive or people on the left versus, right? We as a nation have, you know, 2 senators who are holding up a lot of the work that could be done by other senators trying to do the right thing. Again, a vote. Who's in office? Who's making the decision? It comes through your ability to appoint them by your vote, which is why they're trying to take away your vote, because they don't want you to vote. They want young people to keep listening to Little Uzi Vert. Do that. I ain't saying you can't do that. As opposed to voting. They want you on Twitter, on FaceTime, on Tinder, swiping left or right. I don't know which one of them. You know, checking out some dating app. Hey, boo. Hey, boo. Now, I ain't saying you can't do all that. I'm saying they want to distract you from the ultimate shenanigans they're pulling, which is to deny you the right to vote. Now, you still protest. What can we do? We still got to raise our voices, right? Martin Luther King Jr. and Black people in the 1960s couldn't vote, but they had to raise their voices. They had to protest. They had to be about the business of defending ideas that are extremely valuable and important and fundamental to American governance, democracy, and social practice. So we got to continue to get out there, raise our voices, protest, raise our voices in serious way. Because the people who are in control now, the people who got a 6-3 margin, they ain't did that yesterday. They've been planning that for the last 30, 40 years. How we get back, how we get on, what do we have to do? How do we lay out the premise and practice of getting rid of abortion, of Roe versus Wade? We got to get the Supreme Court. We had our eyes on the presidency, which is true, but then they had their eyes on state senates, on the United States Senate. They had their eyes on local legislators, the legislative bodies that were able to make a difference. So that's what we got to do, to figure out what the heck is involved in transforming American practice. And we got to have patience, and we got to have the long game. We got to play chess, not checkers, and figure out ways in which we can galvanize populations of vulnerable citizens who are being attacked by these practices and get them to the polls, but also raise up our voices and challenge the legitimacy of these beliefs in the best way we can, whether in court, whether in the public square, whether in rising up to say that what's going on is illegal, immoral, unethical, and then, you know, launch those challenges on a number of fronts at the same time.
Thank you, Dr. Dyson. Our next question. The first anniversary of the January 6, 2021 insurrection on the U.S. Capitol and our democracy just passed.
Mm-hmm.
What measures do you believe the federal government and citizens should take to prevent such an action from occurring in the future?
Yeah, that's another great question. Look, the thing is, this is what we're talking about now. No Republican except Lynn Cheney and her father, Dick Cheney, Darth Vader himself, showed up at the end of 1 year anniversary to say, we got to step against this stuff. No Republican. It ain't both sides, right? And I'm usually far more, trying to be bipartisan, work together, all that. I'm down with that. But ain't no both sides on the Holocaust. Ain't no both sides on slavery, even though there were both sides on both of them. One side was right, another side was wrong. Now it's complicated, it's nuanced, I understand that. But at the end of the day, ain't no both sides on whether you beat, women. Ain't no both sides on what's your perspective on. No, evil is evil, wrong is wrong. And so when you're talking about undermining and undercutting and subverting the possibility of expanding American democracy, ain't no both sides to that. Now, there are complicated, nuanced, conflicted, paradoxical feelings, passions, ideas, sentiments, reflections. Yeah, all that's true. And ain't nobody got the truth unto him or herself. That's true. And one side ain't better than the other necessarily and ordinarily, all things being considered equal. That's true, but all things ain't equal. And so on the 1 year anniversary, we got to remember, if no Republican is willing to stand up and call for a commission to investigate it, stop the bullshit stuff. Are you crazy? They ain't on both sides. And so we've got to put in office people who find January 6th problematic. If you are a sitting elected official on the federal level with a voice to say, let's have a commission to discover what we did that day, and you don't impanel it, and you don't vote for that because you're trying to say it's politics and stuff, you own the BS and the malarkey, and stop lying. So one of the things we got to do is put right kind of people in the office on the left and right, Democrat and Republican, since those two parties are running stuff in terms of official policy. But we got to challenge those things. And we got to put right kind of people and right thinking people in darn office so that a difference can be made, right? And we got to continue to say that it's wrong, and we can't pretend it's not wrong. And when you vote, if this other person who was in office when that happened wants to be back in office, again, you got to think about what that might mean, right? You got to think about who you voting for. Oh, he wasn't a bad guy. He did good things. Come on, man. As they say on Monday Night Football, come on, man. So you gotta really consider all of that stuff. And if you're talking about Martin Luther King Jr. as we are today, what is King talking about? Justice, democracy, the vulnerable, the poor, militarism, economic and power and wealth, and the accumulation of capital that subverted American democracy. What? That's what he's talking about. And if you ain't talking about that, you ain't talking about the things that King was talking about as you celebrate it. And so for me, January 6th undermines American democracy. You mad at Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee and can't get a job since. But you ain't mad on January 6th at people dragging a darn Confederate flag in the halls, the hallowed halls of democracy. That's divisive. That's undermining unity. That's celebrating secession, disloyalty, and treachery, because they wanted to create another union against the American system. Just think about that. Think about that when you're voting. Think about that when you're talking about local politics, when you're talking about school boards. Maybe if we weren't trying to outlaw and ban books, you need to read them so you can understand what the hell January 6th represents, what the trajectory of white supremacy has been. Learn your history, but we're too busy trying to ban history because we want to ban ideas and bodies that we find problematic. And we got to stop that. We got to stymie that. We got to stifle that. And we got to transform that.
Thank you, Dr. Dyson. I actually have the final question for you.
Yes, sir.
So, Dr. Dyson, what are the biggest misconceptions lawmakers and politicians perpetuate to distort Dr. King's legacy of equal rights for all Americans?
Yes, sir. Great question. I tried to hint at this in my talk, but one of the greatest misconceptions is that Dr. King was about a colorblind, ideal. Now, he wanted to transcend color and be colorblind in the best sense of that word, but not in the ways we talk about it. Hey, let's pretend that everything was equal from the get-go. Now that you got rights, if you talk about race as a Black person, you are undermining Dr. King. Get off of the drugs and get back to reality. That's not what Dr. King was talking about. And so we're trying to make him the poster boy for a kind of malevolent or misguided color blindness that doesn't have the best interests of American democracy at stake. In order to get beyond color, sometimes you got to go through it. And we don't want people to deny who they are, Black or brown or red or yellow, parts of the rainbow, indigenous, Pacific Rim, Latino, African American. I got to transcend my race in order for me to participate in American society. Jews, Poles, Italians, and Irish, they don't have to give that up. Why we got to give up who we are? Let's accept the broad range of who we are. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that Dr. King stayed in one place and didn't change his mind. He grew, he evolved. He said, I hate to conclude at the end of at the end of his life, he didn't know it was the end of his life, but near the end, that most Americans were unconscious racists. I mean, he was far closer to critical race theory than you think he was. And you don't even know what critical race theory is. Please study it before you get mad at it and throw it away and say it's stupid. Please understand what it is. Read some books, read some ideas, read what critical race theory started as, for what its impetus was and is, and why it continues to be important in the argument over American life. So, Martin Luther King Jr. evolved, became far more progressive, more revolutionary, willing to challenge the system of American capitalism, and did so by sacrificing personally. And so, many of us who claim to even be progressive haven't made the kind of sacrifice he's talking about in order for those truths and practices to become real. And so we've got to think about that. And then thirdly, one of the misconceptions is that, again, they quote those 34 words he uttered when he was 34 years old. I have a dream one day my 4 little children will live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And people say, well, it's the content of your character, not the color of your skin. Tell that to a criminal justice system that is unjust. Tell that to a lending system that is unjust. Tell that to a public education system that is continually unjust and marginalizing students of color and reproducing the pathology of segregated schools. So Martin Luther King Jr. Was about transforming American society and democracy in the most enabling, uplifting, and edifying fashion possible, the most redemptive fashion possible. And a lot of, politicians try to use his name, pimp his legacy, who don't want to confront the radical demand for justice that he put forth.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dyson. Again, my name is Narcis Kuna, and I'm a senior at UMass Dartmouth, and I have the honor of representing our campus on the University of Massachusetts Board of Trustees. And on behalf of Chancellor Fuller, the faculty, staff, and students at UMass Dartmouth, I would like to present you with a gift. We wish we could give you in person, but we'll have it sent to you very soon. And we would like to thank you for delivering the keynote address today, and thank you for sharing all these kind words. And we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate y'all and your wonderful words and encouragement and the gift and award. I'm deeply grateful and honored to be here and for this tremendous opportunity. And I look forward to your presidency and you're in the Senate or Congress or maybe in the White House. So thank you so very much, my brother, for your good work and for UMass Dartmouth and for all the wonderful people who are doing a great job here in America at your school, at your institution, and across the board to make a difference. Thank you so kindly.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, I would like to invite back the members of the D Sword Gospel Choir, accompanied by a unique sound band, to perform Live Through It, a song written by James Fortune and Faya.
Life is filled with so many ups and downs. Have you ever been there? One day you're smiling, the next day you're fighting to hold back your tears, to hide how you feel. So tired of faking like everything is okay when you know it's not right. No sleep at night. You may be asking, cause you never imagined, how can this be God? This cannot be God. I can only tell you what he told me. Live through it, grow through it, get through it. You can make it if you just pray through it. Don't let this be the end for you. So live through it. Someone you love may have just let you down. It's not the end of the world. God already knew everyone who will leave you. It's better this way. Don't beg them to stay. You didn't see it coming, and now you feel broken. How can this be God? This cannot be God. I can only tell you what he told me. Live through it, grow through it, get through it. You can make it if you just pray through it. Don't let this be the end for you. So live through it. I know you're saying now, there's no way I can live through this. But live through it. No one can understand all that you have been dealing with. You're dying inside. You're in the fight of your life. But I know, and he's there, and you win. Live through it, grow through it, get through it. You can live through it. You can live through it. It's working for your good. You can live through it. You can live through it. It's working for your good. You can live through it. You can live through it. It's working for your good. Thing it's working for. It's working for your good. It's working for. It's working for your good. Thing you're good. You're good. You're good. You're good. It's working for. It's working for my good. Sing my good. My good. My good. My good. No, this will not be the end for you. So live through it.
Thank you, D. Sword Gospel Choir, for that wonderful performance. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone in attendance for your support of today's 20th annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. virtual breakfast celebration. Special thank you to Chancellor Fuller, members of his cabinet and staff, the deans of the various colleges, the Office of the Provost, the Office of Human Resources, the Office of Student Affairs, and to the UMass Dartmouth community for your unwavering support of this event. To our keynote speaker, Dr. Eric Dyson, it's been truly a pleasure meeting you today. While the pandemic has required us to think creatively outside the box in terms of programming, COVID-19 failed to diminish the enthusiasm of this event, as over 250 people were in attendance this morning. We attribute that result to the impact of your inspirational story and message. Thank you, thank you, thank you for visiting UMass Dartmouth. I'd like to also thank Candida Rose, Unique Sound Band, and our very own D. Sword Gospel Choir for their amazing musical performances. To Narcisse Kunda and Jasmine Jenkins, our student leaders, thank you for serving as co-hosts along with me for this year's celebration. When I grow up, I want to be just like you. This event could not have been possible without the tireless efforts of the 2022 Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Virtual Breakfast Planning Committee. Kudos to Peggy Dias, Executive Director, IT Services, Dr. Laysel Hall, Associate Director, Frederick Douglass Unity House, Diane Gomes, IT Telecommunications Coordinator, and the members of the Black History Four Seasons Council, who ensured that each and every detail for this program were taken care of. Special thanks to Scott Lynch and Greg Peculian from the Department of Computing and Information Technology Services for the logistic and technical support. Thank you to Ryan Merrill and Sophia Love in the Office of the Chancellor for your assistance, coordination, and support of the university's executive leadership for participation at today's event. To our colleagues in university marketing, a special thank you to Mary Avery, Kevin Diagria, Chelsea Krusa, and Heather Tripp for your extraordinary efforts in promoting and marketing this event to the campus and to the community at large. And last, but certainly not least, to the members of the local community, please know that we are truly appreciative of each and every one of you being here with us today and sharing in this event with the UMass Dartmouth community. It is our hope that you have truly enjoyed today's program, especially our keynote speaker, Dr. Eric Dyson, and our very own Chancellor Fuller for their inspiring words. We all know that there's continued work to be done. We hope that each of you leaves here today encouraged to accept Dr. King's call to action and to make strides to create a world where one's race, gender, ethnicity, religious or political belief, education, socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, culture, or disability do not serve as deterrents or hindrances from being free, productive, and contributing members of society. To close our program, I'd like to invite Candida Rose back to perform her original composition, Love Each Other Through.
This second song, I'd like to get a little personal, if I may. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, another one of his famous quotes, "I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear." And so this song that's called Love Each Other Through comes from that place within me, where I still chose to see the beauty in all of the chaos that was happening in 2020, the summer of 2020, all of the chaos behind the pandemic and the tragedy that we all witnessed of George Floyd. But I still, like I said, saw the beauty in people who were helping and my own daughter. And just, so I want to send this out to all of those who choose love. In a world so filled with chaos, when all our hope seems lost, there are treasures we must hold on to, no matter what the cost. Compassion, kindness, and empathy, if we can only name a few. And for humanity's sake, love's the most precious in my view. We've got to love each other through till we reach the other side. We must love each other through. Now's not the time to run and hide. Let's lift each other up in prayer, 'cause there's always solace there. What we need to do is love each other through. If you ever feel like you're falling, don't be afraid to reach for my hand. I'll be there to lift you to safety. I will help you regain your stand. Yes, I am my brother's keeper, my sister's too. No matter what people may say, 'cause at the heart of it all, I know love's the only way. Yes, we've got to love each other through until we reach the other side. We must love each other through. Now's not the time to run and hide. Let's lift each other up in prayer, 'cause there's always solace there. What we need to do is love each other through. As we travel through this life, we realize we're not alone. As we share our good, open up our hearts, we'll find joy we've never known. We've got to love each other through till we reach the other side. I hope you all can feel this with me. We'll love each other through. Now's not the time to run and hide. Let's lift each other up in prayer, 'cause there's always solace there. What we need to do is love each other through. What we need to do is love each other through. Let's love.
Thank you, Candida, for that beautiful performance. In closing, we'd like to thank you all for your support and participation this morning. We'd like to remind you that UMass Dartmouth celebrates Black History all year long. Please stay tuned for additional programming throughout the year. Before you leave and go about your day, I encourage you to stay with us for the next few minutes to reflect on the words of Dr. King and those of our keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, while listening to the historic rallying cry for the civil rights movement. We shall overcome.
Hello everyone. Crazy times, huh? On March 11th, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. And it seems as if the world has come to a screeching halt. And in times like these, it's natural for everyone to be anxious and scared and not really sure of the future. There's a song that got us through one period in time. And I believe that same song can get us through this period. So from my family, the aliens, and myself, we just simply want to say, hold on, let's keep each other in prayer. And at the end of this, we can say we use this time to reset, to relax, and to recalibrate and become more connected with the community. It's such a beautiful thing. I've seen more of my neighbors in these last few weeks than I've ever seen. So hold on, and we'll get through this together. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome.
in hand, song. We shall overcome.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes our program. Be well and stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day.